Altruism, acting for the benefit of others at a cost to oneself, has long fascinated philosophers, psychologists, economists, and biologists alike. From everyday acts of kindness to extreme self-sacrifice, altruism raises deep questions about human motivation, morality, and the structure of ethical life. Are altruistic actions genuinely selfless, or are they ultimately driven by hidden self-interest? Is altruism morally required, morally admirable but optional, or even morally problematic? And how should societies cultivate or regulate altruistic behavior? The philosophy of altruism sits at the intersection of ethics, moral psychology, political philosophy, and metaphysics. Classical thinkers debated whether virtue requires concern for others, while modern philosophers have analyzed altruism in light of rational choice, evolutionary theory, and global justice. This article offers a comprehensive philosophical overview of altruism, its conceptual foundations, historical development, major theoretical interpretations, critiques, and contemporary debates. Defining altruism. The term altruism was coined in the 19th century by Auguste Comte, derived from the Latin alter, other. Comte used it to describe a moral orientation that places the welfare of others above one's own. In contemporary philosophy, altruism is typically defined as behavior or motivation aimed at benefiting others, especially when it involves some cost or risk to the agent. Philosophers distinguish between several forms of altruism. Behavioral altruism, actions that benefit others regardless of the agent's motivation. Psychological altruism, actions motivated by a genuine concern for others' welfare. Moral altruism, the normative view that individuals ought to prioritize or significantly consider the interests of others. These distinctions matter. An act may be behaviorally altruistic, but psychologically egoistic, for example, donating to charity purely to gain social approval. Conversely, a person may feel deep concern for others but fail to act effectively. Philosophical debates often turn on which sense of altruism is under consideration. Ancient roots, altruism and virtue ethics. Although the word altruism is modern, the idea is ancient. In Greek philosophy, ethical life was understood primarily in terms of virtue and human flourishing, eudaimonia. Aristotle did not frame morality as self-sacrifice for others, yet his account of virtue includes generosity, friendship, and civic responsibility. For Aristotle, the virtuous person takes pleasure in acting well toward others, suggesting that concern for others is integrated into one's own flourishing rather than opposed to it. Plato, particularly in the Republic, emphasized harmony within the soul and the city. Justice involves each part doing its proper role for the good of the whole. While Plato did not advocate self-sacrifice in the modern sense, he saw moral goodness as inseparable from contributing to a just social order. In contrast, certain ancient traditions did emphasize strong other-regarding duties. Stoicism taught that all human beings are citizens of a single cosmopolis, bound by rationality and mutual obligation. The Stoic idea of oikeiosis involved expanding concern from oneself to family, community, and eventually all humanity. Similarly, Indian philosophical traditions, such as Buddhism and certain strands of Hindu ethics, place compassion, karu, and selfless action, nikma karma, at the center of moral life. These traditions often went further than Greek ethics in explicitly challenging attachment to the self. Altruism in Christian moral thought. Christian philosophy and theology profoundly shaped Western conceptions of altruism. The commandment to love your neighbor as yourself and the ideal of agape, self-giving love, introduced a moral framework in which self-sacrifice could be a supreme virtue. The life and death of Jesus were interpreted as paradigmatic acts of altruism, giving rise to an ethics that valorized charity, humility, and care for the vulnerable. Thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas wrestled with the relationship between love of self and love of others. Aquinas argued that properly ordered self-love is not opposed to loving others. Rather, one loves others as sharing in the same ultimate good, namely God. Still, Christian ethics often elevated altruism to a demanding moral ideal, especially in monastic and ascetic traditions. Critiques of altruism. Altruism has also faced philosophical criticism from unexpected directions. Friedrich Nietzsche famously criticized altruistic morality as life-denying, arguing that it suppresses individuality and excellence in favor of herd values. From this perspective, excessive altruism can become a tool of social control. Feminist philosophers have raised concerns about how ideals of self-sacrifice disproportionately burden women and marginalized groups. They argue that uncritical celebration of altruism can reinforce unjust expectations of care and self-denial, obscuring issues of power and reciprocity. These critiques do not necessarily reject concern for others, but they call for a more nuanced understanding of altruism that accounts for context, agency, and justice. Altruism and the self. At a deeper philosophical level, altruism raises metaphysical questions about the nature of the self. Is the self a sharply bounded individual, or is it fundamentally relational? If human identity is constituted by relationships, then altruism may not involve self-sacrifice at all, but rather the expression of an expanded sense of self. Philosophers influenced by communitarianism, care ethics, and non-Western traditions often emphasize this relational view. On such accounts, the opposition between self-interest and altruism is overstated. Caring for others is part of caring for oneself within a shared moral world. Conclusion. The philosophy of altruism reveals the complexity of moral life. Far from being a simple matter of selflessness versus selfishness, altruism encompasses questions about motivation, obligation, virtue, social structure, and human identity. Different philosophical traditions offer competing yet complementary insights. Utilitarianism emphasizes impartial concern, Kantian ethics highlights rational duty, virtue ethics integrates altruism into flourishing, and critical perspectives caution against moral excess and injustice. In an increasingly interconnected world marked by global challenges, poverty, climate change, technological risk, the question of how and why we should act for the sake of others has never been more urgent. Philosophy does not provide a single, final answer, but it equips us with conceptual tools to reflect more deeply on what it means to live well with and for others. Altruism, understood philosophically, is not merely about giving up oneself. It is about understanding the ethical shape of a life shared with others.